screenshots. Is it okay to take a screenshot of this? Ron, do you have is it all right if we are recording? So I imagine you're comfortable with screenshots as well of the presentation. I think that's what you mean, Justice. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So welcome to everyone. I see familiar faces and there's still some more folks coming in. My name is Emily Kandagawa. I am the Secretary Treasurer for Maile Alii. We're a sponsor, one of the branches of Hui Aloha Aina who's sponsoring this talk tonight to celebrate Joseph Nawahi on his birthday. I think most of us have been introduced to Joseph Nawahi through Ron, or at least have had a bigger, richer picture of his life and his legacy because of a lot of the research that Ron has shared on social media and through our many different talks over the years with Hui Aloha Aina. And just excited to. I feel like every time that we have these kinds of talks or we learn something new from folks like Ron, that he just becomes more and more endeared to us as, I know, arguably the greatest patriot who ever lived, but I don't think there's an argument there. So he just is. Really excited to dive into this talk, and I'll let Ron introduce himself. I'm not sure if he needs any introduction nowadays, but take it away, Ron. Thank you for sharing with us.
Okay, aloha mai kako. Somebody shake if they wave at me if they can hear me, so I know I'm speaking to human beings. There you go. Thank you.
Can hear you, Ron.
Mahalo, brother. Mahalo. Ovao Ron Williams Jr. He noho wau I ka aina o ka imu ki I ka moku o kona. Moko puni o Oahu, ko Hawaii pai aina no laila e ho'onoaka wau I ko'u mo'u kuauhau. So I'm a malahini to this place, Hawaii. I've been here for 26 years, but it's still not my birthplace. And so I want to start, Kalamai, I want to start by giving you a little bit of my genealogy as my kumu have trained me to do. I'll be brief. My mother is Janet Marie LaBounty. Her people come from Chicago, Illinois, which is where I was born. They come back from Montreal, and before that, England, France, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and Czechoslovakia. My father is Ron Williams Sr., Big Ron. He comes from a long line of farmers and fishermen in the southern part of the United States. It's where I grew up. I grew up in Arkansas. My dad still lives in a trailer, hunts and fishes every day of his life. His people come from that area of Arkansas and Oklahoma. So that's who I am. My academic mo'ukuauhau, many of you know my story. I went to college at 17 years old. To Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. I was there for 3 semesters. I enrolled in 18 classes and I passed one of them, maybe two. But I wasn't ready for college. I left, went back home to LA, lived life, got a little kolohe, but ended up going back to school once I came out here to Hawaii, and was incredibly blessed to meet the right kumu and have kumu take me under their wings, including my first kumu, Akoni Akana, from the Friends of Moku'ula, my first academic kumu on Maui, which was Keopi Raymond. And then after that, Haunani K. Trask, Lily Kalakamek Lahiva, John Osorio, Kanalu Young, Noinoi Silva, and others. So I appreciate all of my kumu. Anything I'm able to give you guys tonight stems from them. So I appreciate them. I want to thank Hui Aloha Aina tonight for sponsoring, giving us this platform, and each and every one of you, seriously and honestly, for coming. We're all crazy busy nowadays, and we've all got so many things that are going on in our lives. And I appreciate you taking time out this evening to talk about this mo'olelo of Iosepa Nawahi. Emily kind of gave it away at the beginning, and that is what I want to focus on tonight. Tonight's not going to be so much a biography. Many of you know who Joseph Nawahi is, as it is acclaiming. Joseph Nawahi, in my mana'o, was the greatest Hawaiian patriot who ever lived. And that's not my mana'o as a basic observer, as somebody who likes him. That's as a historian who's done work on this for quite a while, and as someone who is quoting his contemporaries, his people around him, his fellow legislators, his fellow townsfolk said he was the greatest patriot alive. So as we go through tonight, I want to kind of prove that to you and talk to you about this thing of patriotism, and show you what a man he was. Not just that he was born on this day and he achieved this and so forth, but but really dig down and get into some of the things where he had moments to make decisions and decisions he made. And I want to show you how difficult those decisions were amidst a time when we can only imagine. We talk about how incredibly rough we have it right now, and we do, and folks have lost loved ones, and that's very real. But imagine if all of this was going on amidst an overthrow of the land we lived in. Imagine if there were secret police visiting our meetings, taking notes, telling the government about what we were doing. Imagine if there were folks being arrested by the hundreds. Imagine if people's lands and livelihoods were being stolen. That was going on while Joseph Nawahi was in the midst of this, and he served in a kuleana that put him at the forefront of all of this. So we're going to talk about that tonight. I want to start off with kind of a housekeeping note. Many of you know that I work at the Hawaii State Archives. This project tonight and many of the projects we've done in the past all revolve around this idea of claiming space on the physical landscape. It's an idea myself and Lynette Cruz came up with a few years back. I forget which one of us said it first, but we were working together and talking a lot together. And this idea of that you can go down a street in Hawaii and pull over and look around and nothing denotes Kanaka Oiwi. Nothing says, you know, the schools are named after Jefferson and McKinley and Washington, and the libraries are named after this and Cook and so forth and so forth. And so the idea of, instead of just complaining about it, literally claiming space, whether it's putting up a flyer, whether it's claiming space in your home with a photograph, whether it's claiming space in your classrooms with photographs, making sure that the next generation of people growing up in Hawaii see Kanaka Oiwi in the physical landscape. That's what all of this is about. And so I want to start by showing you a photograph that we had created this year. I'm going to share my screen in just 1 minute. Okay. I'm going to come down here, share screen, desktop. Okay. And then I'm going to pull this up. Whoop, that's not it. Okay, I'm getting there, I promise. And it's right there. Okay, come on, open up. Okay, can you see that screen? I can see your face, Uncle Walter. Can you see that? Okay, thank you. I know somebody's alive out there. So what you're looking at on the left part of my screen, I think it's, I assume it's the left part of yours, is a glass plate negative. They're very unique in photography, and they were only around for a few decades. And they would, and I don't know the process, I'm not a scientist, but through some kind of chemical reaction, they were able to put the image inside of glass. And so there was no negative. You couldn't use it to make 10 other ones. This was it. There was one negative. Once it broke, it was gone.
Hello, Myron.
Yes.
This is a paper that we're seeing on the share screen.
A paper, okay. Thank you. So you should be seeing my PowerPoint. There it is. Let's try this one. How's that?
Aye.
Aye. Mahalo. Mahalo. So so this is the glass plate negative. So it's a process where they put the image inside of glass and it preserved it perfectly for, unless it was broken or cracked or spilled on or something like that, it preserved the image perfectly for as long as they kept the glass plate negative. Well, the Hawaii State Archives has around 11,000 of these glass plate negatives from the 1870s and on. And so many of your kopuna might be in them. Many of the government officials are in them. We have a glass plate negative of Joseph Nawahi and also of Emma Nawahi. And so if you've seen a photograph of Joseph Nawahi anywhere in the world, if you've ever seen a photograph of Joseph Nawahi, it comes from this one particular glass plate negative, because there is no other negative. There's other illustrations and drawings and so forth, but this is what we have. And so this has been scanned at about 600 DPI, which gives you that poster in the background behind me there. We blew that up last year, right? But that's at 600 DPI. Hui Aloha Aina and myself have recently had it scanned at 1200 DPI. So the image you're looking at on my screen, you can blow that up 3 foot by 4 foot and it'll look crystal clear. You can see the strands of his hair, you can see the image of his tie and so forth. And so the reason why I'm going into this is that's in the public archives, which means it's absolutely free, except for the fact that you have to have that process paid for, right? But since it's already been scanned, any orders for new scans come in, it costs you 25 cents. Now, don't everybody run tonight, because I'll get in trouble. But I want to let you know that this image at 1200 DPI is available to you for 25 cents. You can order from the Hawaii State Archives. I've put the glass plate negative number on the screen there. So glass plate negative 12,236 Joseph Nawahi. You can email the State Archives if you'd like that image. They'll send you a digital copy of that. The reason why I'm telling you this again is because I want you to produce it. I want you to produce flyers. I want you to produce images. I want you to make life-size images and so forth. And all of us start claiming space on the physical landscape for the greatest patriot who ever lived, right? So instead of us, spending our years complaining about the fact that there are no Hawaiians that we see in the landscape, let's change that, okay? So that's the housekeeping note I wanted to make to start, is the glass plate negative, okay? So let me go back to my, let me go back to my beginning here. He Hawaii ho'i ko Hawaii. Hey, I'm sorry. He Nawahi ho'i ko Hawaii. Commemorating the life and legacy of a Hawaiian Kingdom patriot. Now, this was part of a mele that was written by Mr. Sheldon, who wrote a biography of Joseph Nawahi in the 19th century. And I have that with me here today. Actually, it was the beginning of the 20th century. It's a book put out by UH Hilo, right? And this is the biography we have of Joseph Nawahi. And it starts off with this claim that I'm going to read to you. And I'll read to you my translation. I've got it over here on the side. Okay. Okay, I'm going to bear with me. I'm going to read through this preface that he wrote. So this comes from Kahikina Kelikona, so JGM Sheldon, right? On September 28th, 1908. And he wrote this. Among all nations of men in which a Christian lifestyle has been established and the seeds of knowledge planted, their native lands are permeated throughout with the cool fragrance and the haunting sweetness with which they always recall the names, the deeds, and the stories of their leaders who sacrificed their own lives for their homeland and for the rights and the welfare of their countrymen. So he's writing about, Hawaii was incredibly cosmopolitan, right? Kalakaua had gone around the world. The kingdom had 137 consulates across the world on 6 continents. They knew the stories of these world leaders of the 19th century. And he says, when our mind's eye glances back to the eras that have passed, we see the faces of the visionaries, the experts, and the national leaders for each land, from the southernmost boundaries of the globe to the northern reaches, and from the eastern shores to the west. And it is as though their features are visible via the light of conscience in the soul of every man, because England has Gladstone, Germany has Bismarck, Russia has Alexander, Italy has Garibaldi, Spain has Columbus, America has Washington, and Hawaii indeed has Nawahi. There are many other experts of those nations, other nations, and of Hawaii as well, which could be listed. But what indeed is the purpose of listing them when Nawahi's standing and his deeds are sufficient for him to be listed in the uppermost rank of patriots, royalists, and nationalists like those just listed above? Ask yourself, who was the prophet of the Reciprocity Treaty? Look to the record of the opposing speeches on that topic, and it is seen that Joseph Nawahi of East Hawaii was the very first, along with the voice of G.W. Pilipo, the Lion of North Kona. Nawahi and his companion, Pilipo, were the seers and prophetic visionaries of Hawaii who spoke these words. The Reciprocity Treaty is the first step towards annexation, and if this idea is approved, the sovereignty of our homeland will be lost. In time to follow, the truth of that vision became known. The cherished gem of all the enlightened nations is the care and loving remembrance of the tales of those who gave their all and who sacrificed their lives for king, country, and nation. The author now submits this biography of the Honorable Joseph Nawahi to his peers, for whom he tirelessly and patiently labored up until the last hour of his life, when he returned to the bosom of the Almighty Father, whose sanctity he always upheld. Within this book, you will read of his nature in the days of his childhood. His endeavors while growing up will be shown, and his status in those days when he stepped to the heights will be proven truly. I call humbly to my beloved native brethren from Hawaii of Keawe to Kauai of Mano, as well as the cherished island of Ni'ihau. Here is the warrior, the expert, the skilled one, the patriot and true nationalist, the visionary of our beloved archipelago inherited from the ancestors. Cherish and care for his biography and read it with care, that we should thereby memorialize him and his famous deeds, filled as they were with patriotism and love of his people. Nawahi, you have been snatched away from us. You have been taken from the bosom of your brethren, but your loving deeds for us and for the land have grown, have sprouted, and have blossomed forth in our hearts. With all humbleness, Kahikina Kelekona, James Sheldon, author. Okay. So that gives us an understanding of that comparison, of that saying, yes, Washington, or the US has Washington, Britain has Gladstone, and like that, Hawaii has Nawahi. And so I want to, again, I'm going to go through and kind of show you some of these, dig down into some of these acts that he did and the moments that give context to the moments that he made these decisions, and have you think about this claim of him being the greatest patriot of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And if that's true, then how do we justify that now today we know him, but not everyone in Hawaii knows him? Most of the folks in Hawaii, I would argue, don't know him. Most of the libraries, the public libraries around the state of Hawaii, don't have photographs of the greatest patriot who lived, and so forth and so forth. And so we start to question why these things are true, and we hopefully are inspired to action. Okay, so let me pull up my PowerPoint once again, and I will get started here. We'll go to share screen. Oh, there we go. Boom, boom. Okay, you guys can see that, I hope.
Aye.
Aye, okay. So I want to start by talking about something that I think has gotten lost in the mix as we rush forward towards the last 30 or 40 years of fighting to gain recognition of Hawaiian sovereignty once again, and the occupation of the kingdom. And that is our terminology that we use. You know, the first authors to use a certain term, we usually go with it and so forth. Not all of us are political scientists, not all of us are historians and have the time or the energy to dig into these things. But there are some specific differences in these terms that we've used, and I want to point them out as per they are applied to Nawahi. Okay? The most common term that we use when we talk about Nawahi, we talk about Hui Aloha Ainet, we talk about these folks, is we think of them as royalists. And you'll often see in paragraphs written, in opposition to the PG were the royalists, and so forth. Now, a royalist, as you see here, is an adherent of king or monarchical government. So a royalist was someone who wanted to see the monarchy thrive, right? Which Joseph Nawahi absolutely was, which the vast majority of Kanaka Oiwi absolutely were. They wanted to see that monarchy survive. Now, a loyalist is one who is or remains loyal, especially to a political cause, party, government, or sovereign. So a loyalist is loyal to that government, right? They could be loyal to the sovereign too. Joseph Nawahi, no one saw the queen in such light as he did. No one respected the queen more than he did. He absolutely was a royalist. But above his royalism, he was a loyalist. He believed in the nation. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more specifically, especially during the reign of Kalakaua. Nawahi was one of the 6 senators who voted against Kalakaua and voted for Queen Emma in that 1874 election. He was one of the strongest opponents of Kalakaua and many of the policies that Kalakaua held. It doesn't mean he was disloyal. He was being loyal to his government, his nation, his lahui, because he felt like the thing that the monarch happened to be doing at the time was a wrong policy, which I would argue makes you the ultimate patriot. A patriot is one who loves, supports, and defends one's country. Yeah. Without getting into too much trouble, Robert Wilcox was a good example of someone who was a loyalist, not a royalist. He changed over time. But there were several points in Hawaiian history when Robert Wilcox wanted to overthrow the monarchy and institute a republic run by Kanaka Oiwi. He was loyal to the government. He wanted to see the lahui survive, but he wasn't a fan of the monarchy at certain points, right? So again, there were folks who were royalists. There were folks who were loyalists to the government, And that was the ultimate form of patriotism, right? You could argue, and I argue, that Nawahi speaking up and saying to Kalakaua, you borrowing $5 million from the United States is a wrong policy. And him saying that publicly in the legislature and warning about it. You know, Nawahi got up in the 1878 legislature, I believe, and he gave a speech that was one of the most profound speeches given in that legislature. And he says, now this isn't about reciprocity, this is about a loan that the Kalakaua was taking from the United States and also Klaus Spreckels and others. And Nawahi writes about it and gives this speech, and he says in the legislature, he says, I want to tell you guys a story. And this is all the representatives are there, all the House of Nobles are there, they're all dressed up. And he says, one time in history, there were these two great nations, and they went to war, and they fought each other. And the battles raged, and neither side could really take over. Neither side could really gain a significant advantage. And so they both kind of camped right next to each other and held their ground. And eventually, one of the sides says to the other side, you know what? We don't want to fight anymore. We want to give you a peace offering. And so they give them this giant wooden horse that they've built for them. It's the story of the Trojan horse. Nawahi uses the story of the Trojan horse that he's known because he's an educated man and he's studied world literature. He uses the case of the Trojan horse to tell his fellow Kanaka Oiwi, if we start to take this money and if we start to let the United States creep into Hawaii, one foot, one paw, the next thing you know, the whole animal. And he says, that's going to be like the Trojan horse. And he was prescient, he saw this coming. And he says this against the Mo'i, right? Now, understand that the moment the Haole businessmen and sons of the mission started to rise up and attack Kalakaua and say they were going to take the nation, early 80s, mid 80s, Nawahi defends his monarch, comes to the aid of Kalakaua and says, whoa, wait a minute, I'm being critical, but my lahui first, right? So he always looks to his lahui, he always looks to his nation as his ultimate loyalty. Okay, and we'll see a specific letter that I want to focus on later where he shows that with tremendous courage in a letter he writes to Liliuokalani. Okay, so moving on. As I mentioned, we talked about the different leaders of the different nations. Now this is when Nawahi is first elected to the legislature. He's elected in 1874, right? He's part of the 1874 legislature, and Kalakaua has just become monarch. In February, has just become monarch. And Nawahi gets an offer from some gentleman he knows to travel to the United States. And he says, as a youth, this is all I dreamed of: visiting foreign lands, experiencing foreign lands, seeing foreign people, experiencing foreign food, all of these things. And I want to explore and understand that. And so he travels to San Francisco in 1874. This is his actual passport. Now, Hawaiian Kingdom passports were one-time passports. You didn't get one for 10 years and use it all you want. You got a passport every time you left the Kingdom of Hawaii. So this is the passport. The Honorable Joseph Nawahi, lately residing at Honolulu in the Hawaiian Islands, to pass out of the ports thereof on his destination to San Francisco or elsewhere. And all officers of His Majesty's government are required, and all authorities of other friendly states are requested to render him all requisite lawful assistance. Given under my hand and with the seal of the Hawaiian Kingdom, the Foreign Office, Honolulu, this 19th day of February, 1874. And Nawahi travels to San Francisco. And he writes quite a bit about it. It's written actually in Sheldon's book. He talks about arriving in San Francisco. He talks about the houses just going on forever. He rides in a hot air balloon. He talks about the hot air balloons that rose over the city. He goes to Woodward's Garden, which was a beautiful, beautiful garden and eating place area that the city had shown at the time. Kalakaua, by the way, who had gone to Washington, right, in 74, also 74, 75, also talks about visiting the state parks and the government parks in the United States. That's the reason he came back and dedicated Kapiolani Park, to have open space like that for Hawaiians. Nawahi was experiencing that same kind of thing, seeing these other nations and how they ran things also. So he spends time in San Francisco and comes back. This is his first application to the bar in 1878. This is his oath of allegiance to get his law license as a lawyer. Albert Francis Judd was the Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time. And he writes, Albert Francis Judd writes, that Nawahi stood before the bench for 2 hours answering questions without missing a single one. And he was self-educated. Most native lawyers, or most lawyers in general, would study under a lawyer, a prominent lawyer in the office and so forth. Nawahi had purchased the law books and so forth and studied his own, under his own care, and had aced this in front of the Supreme Court and became a lawyer in 1878. He's going to open an office, a law office in Hilo, and spend most of his time. He became known as the man to go to for help when you're dealing with land issues and things like that in Hilo and elsewhere. So now he becomes a lawyer in 1878. He re-ups in the bar in 80, 82, and so forth. And that's his actual oath to our left there. Okay. Now, so soon after that, he meets the woman of his dreams and marries Mrs. Aima Alii. That's their actual marriage license from the Hawaii State Archives. I hereby certify that Joseph Nawahi of Pona, Hawaii, and Emma Aima Alii of Kuku'au, were married by me on the 17th day of February, AD 1884, Reverend Lyman. And so he marries Mrs. Nawahi. Many of you know they became one of the great power couples of Hawaii, including with the Cummins and others. Just a tremendously courageous couple. As he fought, Aima fought. She became really, in my mana'o, one of, if not the most trusted advisor to the Queen. When the Queen is in Washington, D.C. in the 1897, 98, and Joseph has passed, there's a set of letters that go back and forth between the Queen and Emma. And Emma is basically telling her who's on her side and who's pretending to be on her side, and giving her all the dirt of politics of what's going on. And so Emma's one of the few that she trusts completely. She ends up giving her car to Mrs. Nawahi. So Mr. Nawahi and Mrs. They become Mr. and Mrs. Nawahi in 1884. There's your license. In 1891, so now we're moving into, I'm skipping forward in history, but we had the Bayonet Constitution in 1887. In 1887, a group of Haole businessmen, lawyers, doctors, and mission sons formed a group called the Hawaiian League. It was a secret underground league. We have the actual minute books and the roll and everything from Lauren Thurston at the State Archives, and they became a private militia. They drew the Honolulu Rifles under their care, imported guns into E.O. Holland Sons and different businesses, and they signed an oath swearing secrecy and allegiance to the white population in Hawaii. And they looked to take over Hawaii specifically to gain Pearl Harbor for the United States and a release of the sugar tariff that was in Hawaii. And many folks talk about that, the Reciprocity Treaty doing that. The original Reciprocity Treaty that Kalakaua goes to Washington and signs in 1875, becomes law in 1876, didn't give away Pearl Harbor. Hawaiians refused. They had mass meetings at Kaumakapili Church and all other churches, and they told Kalakaua, don't you dare give away Pearl Harbor. We don't give away our land. And so when he went to the Washington, D.C. and negotiated with Ulysses S. Grant, they talked about it, and Kalakaua refused to give away Pearl Harbor, and they signed a treaty anyway. They signed a treaty taking off the tariffs off of different goods and so forth. Well, years later, as that's coming up for renewal in 1887, the United States says, we're not getting a good deal out of this. We're giving you guys are getting to be millionaires in your sugar, and we're not getting anything out of this. So we have to have Pearl Harbor in the renewal. They knew, the local white businessmen knew that Kalakaua would refuse. The only option they had was overthrow him. So they planned the 1887 coup to overthrow him, then agree to this treaty that he wouldn't, of course, agree to, and so forth. And that's what they do. They draft a treaty, they force him to sign it by bayonet, making him kind of a figurehead. And then he's therefore forced to sign the treaty that his cabinet puts forward in 1887. And that's when Hawaii gives away Pearl Harbor to the United States in 87. Ever since that day in 87, when the Bayonet Constitution passes, Hawaiians organized en masse. The first Native Hawaiian political party comes to be. That's Hui Kalai Aina, started by Joseph Nawahi and others. They started in 1887, and they come together as Hui Kalai Aina, and they say, we've got to get rid of Bayonet Constitution. #1 priority. And so they're going to go 2 routes. They're going to go the legislative route and try to call a constitutional convention so that they can change the constitution. And the second option is the executive route, which is have the executive proclaim a new constitution with the support of her cabinet. Now, it's arguable that she could have proclaimed it on her own, because that's what Lota Capoeiva had done in '64. He claimed the power to institute a new constitution. So she could have arguably done that, but it would have been fought over law-wise whether it was legal. But she says, no, I want to do this legally under the bayonet. And that means she has to get her cabinet to agree to the new constitution. So that's what they're setting out to do. But importantly, the Queen says in her own book, in Hawaii Story by Hawaii's Queen, that in 1890, 1891, when she becomes queen, 1892, she didn't think this was possible. We all attribute the Constitution to the Queen and so forth. She says it was Joseph Nawahi, William Punohu White, and Sam Nolan who convinced me that this could be done and that it must be done. So Nawahi goes first while Kalakaua is still king in 1890, but later when Lili'u is queen, they are pushing this. Him and Joseph and William White are pushing this idea of a new constitution. It's something that must be done. He writes this letter to the Queen that you see in front of you, saying to the Queen when she first comes into power, yes, you do have the power to appoint your own cabinet. Some of her advisors and the Haole were saying, no, under the bayonet constitution, you cannot appoint your own cabinet. You just have to go along with who we propose. So he tells her, stand strong. This is your right. The people have your back. So when she first comes into power, it's Nawahi who encourages her to be courageous and push on with this path of creating a new constitution. This is one of many, many dozens of petitions that Joseph Nawahi addresses or presents to the Hawaiian Kingdom legislature in 1892. Now we talk about engagement and so forth, all these old narratives about Hawaiians were apathetic and so forth. I'm not going to curse. Uncle Walter's looking at me. It's such crap. There were over 400 petitions submitted to the Hawaiian Kingdom legislature in 1892 alone. And every one of those petitions by law had to be heard by the legislature and submitted to a committee for review. Now imagine today, if you send an email with your opinion to the governor, you think he reads it? Back then, by law, they had to go through these petitions. So every single one that he submitted dozens asking for a new constitution from the people of Hilo, different divisions of Hilo. This is one example on the screen here, petition number 305 for a new constitution. Representative Nawahi, August 6, 1892. It's referred to the select committee, right? Here's some of the signatures here. As I mentioned, I'm putting together a roster of all the petitions and all the names and everything, but it's a long-term project. But you see a piece of his doing that and telling the Queen, look, we have the votes, we have the citizens, we can do this. Okay. So the Queen hears him. She decides to, okay, this can happen and it should happen. So work with me. So she works with specifically Joseph Nawahi and William White to draft this new constitution, because by now we're talking about mid 1892. The legislature is still not moving forward with a constitution convention. They don't have the 2/3 vote necessary to demand it. And there's lots of opposition from the Haole and others. So they can't get a new constitution passed in the legislature. So now they're going to go the executive route, but they're going to do it legally, even under bayonet, and they're going to get the cabinet to agree, which means she has to get onto the cabinet folks that she trusts. And some of the folks on the cabinet at the present time were folks appointed by others. So she makes the move in November of 1892 of naming Joseph Nawahi to her cabinet as Minister of Foreign Affairs. And this is the actual original appointment here. Lili'u Okalani, by the grace of God, Queen of the Hawaiian Islands, to Joseph Nawahi greeting. Know ye that we, reposing special trust and confidence in your wisdom, integrity, and fidelity, have constituted by you, by Vice President, blah, 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 our Minister of Foreign Affairs. So at this point, Joseph Nawahi becomes Minister of Foreign Affairs for a whole 2 days. As soon as he's appointed and makes it into office, the Haole majority rises up and votes him out of office, the vote of no confidence. And so the Queen has to replace him. But she replaces him with others that she trusts. And it kind of goes back and forth, this fight over a cabinet, into 1893. Now, as we turn into 1893 and the 1892 legislature is closing, the plan is from her and White and Nawahi and Nolan to proclaim the new constitution at the closing of the legislature on January 16th, 1893. I'm sorry, January 14th, 1893. So that's the plan. She's gone to her cabinet, the new cabinet she has, and they've agreed. So she has the cabinet behind her, and she's the executive. Absolutely, she has the power to declare a new constitution. That's what she's going to do on January 14th. So she meets on that morning, January 14th. She meets on that morning at 10 o'clock in the morning in the Blue Room. So at noon, she's going to walk across the street to the legislature where the statue is, the Kamehameha statue. She's going to walk over there and end the 1892 legislature. She's going to walk back to the palace and proclaim this new constitution. But the first thing she does that morning is she meets with William Punahou White and Joseph Nawahi in the Blue Room, and she awards both of them Knight's Order of Kalakaua. Yeah, the highest award in the kingdom to these two gentlemen who were the patriots of the kingdom. And they were the last two royal orders awarded. This was January 14th, 1893. And she says in her book this: with Mr. William White, he, meaning Nawahi, had maintained a strict fidelity to the wishes of the people by whom he had been elected. The behavior of these two patriots during the trying scenes of this session, in such marked contrast to that of many others, won them profound respect. They could never be induced to compromise principles, nor did they for 1 minute falter or hesitate in advocating boldly a new constitution which should accord equal rights to the Hawaiians as well as protect the interests of the foreigners. The true patriotism and love of country of these men had been recognized by me, and I had decorated them with the Knights Commander of Kalakaua. Right? So the Queen says, these are my two patriots, Joseph Nawahi and William Punahou White. As we know, on the 14th, two of her cabinet ministers back out and refused to sign the constitution that they had said they would. The reason is they've been met the night before by Lauren Thurston and his gang. They've told these guys, here's our plan. We're working with Minister Stevens to overthrow the Queen. You don't want to be on the wrong side. And we have the support of the US troops. There's a meeting held in the law offices of Thurston, and they say, and Minister Stevens is there present and says, yes, I am going to bring the troops ashore. General Soper agrees to, with that promise, General Soper agrees to be with that group and so forth. And so these two cabinet ministers back out and say, we don't want to be on the wrong side. And they refuse to sign the new constitution that they had told her they would. And so that begins the overthrow. So we have the overthrow of January 17th, 1893. We have the almost immediate creation of a new Hawaiian political group. That old group had been looking to change bayonet. The new group wants immediately to stop a treaty of annexation that has already gone to the United States, and they want to keep the Queen. So two important notes. It's often said the Queen sent a letter to Washington informing the president and Congress that she wasn't, of what had happened, because remember, the ministers for the provisional government had a 2-week head start, right, on the ship. But it was actually the brand newly formed Ka'ahuhui Hawaii Aloha Aina, who had elected Joseph Nawahi as their president on March 4th, 1893, who sent the first petition through the US minister to Washington saying, wait a minute, this is all screwy, this was done illegally, our Queen is still in power. So Joseph Nawahi and this newly formed Ka'ahuhui Hawaii Aloha Aina, which has been created in Arion Hall, which, if you know where the palace is, directly across the street, you know where the post office is. On the Diamond Head side of the post office, on the Leahi side of that building, in the back was a big hall called Arion Hall. And that's where major meetings and so forth happen. And that's where Hui Hawaii Aloha Aina is formed, and the women's group also on the 27th of that month is formed there. Steps from the palace. And they form this political group and say, we as Kanaka Oiwi, this is our nation, and you're not going to steal it from us. And their first president is Joseph Nawahi. Yeah, Mrs. Nawahi will serve as a officer in the women's group that comes up a month later. So Nawahi becomes president of this group that is active every day, calling meetings, putting out petitions, starting to gather folks, starting to write letters, keeping track of all the political goings on and so forth. But they were also spied upon. The provisional government and later the Republic would hire specials, some Kanaka Oiwi, to attend these Hui Lahaina meetings and report back to the government. So most of the moves, not all, but most of the moves of Hui Lahaina were being watched by the provisional government and later republic. We know of Hui Lahaina as a wonderfully steadfast and peaceful group, but they weren't ignorant. They had also made plans for a military overthrow. One of my favorite reverends, he's the reverend from the Ka'anapali Church, Hihio. Reverend Hihio was the officer of Hui Lahaina in charge of obtaining guns and weapons to bring the queen back. And that was as early as 1894. But for now, they're listening to the queen, and the queen says, stand down. We're going to let this process take part in the United States, and we're going to stop this treaty, which they do, right? So moving into 1893, the end of 1893, some of you know this story, the Blount report had come back and said the US was at fault. It never would have happened without the US troops, and our minister was the head of this, right? So President Cleveland gives a speech in December of 1893, December 18th, I believe, to Congress, and he says, this is where we get that term, he says, this was an act of war done by the United States to a friendly and feeble nation. And if any due regard for our national character exists, we must right this wrong. We must right this wrong. So he decides to reinstate the queen, but he's not going to do it just willy-nilly. He's got terms. So he sends a new US minister to Hawaii, Minister Willis. And Minister Willis arrives, and the provisional government is, that's a nice word I can say, the provisional government is terrified. Now think about this, and they write it in their own letters. Dole was a constitutional lawyer. Smith and all of these guys were lawyers. They knew very well what they had just done was treason. They had just overthrown a lawful government, right? If they're convicted, they're going to die. So they can't give up. They can't let that happen. So Minister Willis comes to Hawaii with these instructions of the president to talk to the queen and get her to offer these men amnesty, so that they won't be killed and they won't be, their fortune won't be taken away. And if the queen agrees with that, then he'll reinstate the queen. And so they meet for 3 days, Minister Willis. The queen at first refuses. She says, I don't have the power to do that. That involves the whole cabinet and my ministers and so forth. And what if I grant them amnesty and you guys say, okay, and put me back in power, and your warship leaves, and 3 months later they do it again? But the US president insists, and that's a political, you have to understand politics in the US. Hawaii wasn't the #1 thing on the US plate. And if you're going to use US troops to fight and kill white guys to restore a brown queen, that's going to cause political problems for the president of the United States. So he says, I don't want to see that happen. So you got to give them amnesty. And so the queen, you have to give them a pardon. So the queen is thinking about it, okay? And she finally agrees. I believe it's the 11th, but the queen finally agrees and says, yes, I will pardon them and you reinstate me. At this time, in early December of 1893, Joseph Nawahi and the members of Hui Lahaina are hearing rumors all around town. Everybody's talking about what's going on. And Minister Willis has arrived. And some of the rumors are, this and that and this and that, but some of the most kind of vicious rumors say that the queen is going to sell out. She's going to accept $250,000 to step down and the US is going to take over, which wasn't true, but those types of rumors are flying all around. And the truth, as a rumor, is floating around that the queen has been asked to give amnesty to the US, to the people that had committed treason. And at that point, Joseph, and we're, all of us are so, it's so deeply understood that this fight to get the nation back is happening. And we're getting close. If we can get the queen reinstated, it's going to happen. Yet in the midst of all of this, Joseph Nawahi steps forward courageously and even questions that because he truly believes it's problematic. And he writes a letter to the queen, not only he, but Hui Lahaina, that had to be one of the most difficult letters I've ever seen a patriot write to his monarch, because he was a patriot foremost and he wanted to save the Lahui. And so Joseph Nawahi, who has the utmost respect for the queen, his wife is one of her maids-in-waiting, closest people that she has, writes this letter. I'm going to read it to you. Kalamai, I want you to hear him saying these things and understand the difficulty it must have been to write these to his queen. And he writes this letter here. I'm going to read it here. You can see the pages, but I'm going to actually read it over here. Okay. And you can listen, you can close your eyes, you can do whatever you like. So this is and this document is in the seized collection at the Hawaii State Archives. And what that is when the Queen was arrested on, I'll forget the date, when the Queen was arrested in 1895, the 16th, I believe, January, she was taken to imprisonment at the palace. W.O. Smith, Albert Francis Judd, and others went to Washington Place, broke into her safe, and confiscated everything within her safe and her writing desk. And within her safe were her most personal possessions and secret, her political machinations and so forth. So all of these things were in her safe. And we call that a seized collection because it was seized by the government for her trial. Those documents are kept separate, and they're at the Hawaii State Archives today. And in that set of documents is this letter. And it says, to Her Majesty Queen Li'uokalani, Sovereign of the Hawaiian Kingdom, may it please your gracious majesty that the undersigned loyal and respectful subjects of the Hawaiian Kingdom and of your majesty take the liberty of humbly submitting to your majesty what follows, to wit, that they are the officers of an executive body of political association called the Hui Aloha Aina o Hawaii, embracing membership of over 8,000 registered voters, united for the express purpose of preserving the integrity of the Hawaiian monarchy under your majesty's rule, that in their above capacity and in virtue of the delegation unto them given by the members of the said association, the undersigned have, ever since the revolution of the January of the 17th, 1893, used all their endeavors, efforts, power, and influence to those of the members of the association through organization, meetings, petitions, testimony, and other legal means for the object of helping to bring about the restoration of your majesty as sovereign of this kingdom. That these efforts, attended at times with the danger to themselves, their lives, and their property, and to the lives and properties of the members who follow their leadership, have created between themselves and their followers a reciprocal bond of interest, obligation, and responsibilities, where the members of the association expect from the aforementioned officers and executive body the proper information, news, and instruction for their guidance, and expect them to attend to all the objects of the association and to carrying out of the political measures necessary for the complete restoration of the Hawaiian monarchy. So he's saying, we officers of Hui Aloha Aina have a kuleana to our members, and our members are demanding of us the truth. So we're asking you. And he says, whereby the autonomy of the nation and the peace and prosperity of its inhabitants may be secured forever, that among the foremost measures expected by your people and promised by our association is the promulgation by your majesty of a new constitution, more just and liberal to your own people. And finally, that the members of our association will look out to the undersigned in their above capacities and hold them responsible for any failure in carrying out such a measure as desired and deemed necessary by your people. So Nawahi is telling the Queen, it's not just about restoration. We demand a new constitution, not going back to the bayonet. We don't want the same old thing we just fought 5 years for. We want one person, one vote. We want our kingdom back. And he says, therefore, the undersigned feel that it is an imperious duty of theirs to respectfully represent to your majesty that the members of the Hui Aloha Aina are at present laboring under the serious apprehensions and fears, lest through ill-advised and hasty concessions, the future of the kingdom may be jeopardized at the very moment when the impending restoration of your majesty would otherwise fill the hearts of your people with gladness and fulfill the wishes of your faithful subjects who have been bravely standing by your majesty through all these long months of dangers, insults, and anxious waiting. It has been announced by the local papers and not contradicted that Minister Willis, after negotiating with your majesty personally and secretly, without the advice of any real representatives of your people, has requested the provisional government to surrender on condition of your majesty's promising to respect the old bayonet constitution of 1887 and agreeing to grant the rebels who have attempted to sell the country a full political amnesty. On this matter, we wish to be allowed to state, number one, the restoration being not a favor, but an obligation of justice on the American government ought to be done without any restrictive conditions. And your majesty owes to the Hawaiian people who have stood by you to now stand by them and not sacrifice one iota of their rights. Therefore, in the event of your majesty considering that certain concessions might be granted, only such as might be personal to your majesty ought to be acceded to privately. But any conditions interesting the whole nation, such as those especially of constitution and an amnesty, ought not to be granted except after due consultation with the representatives of your people. And in the event of your majesty not considering your present cabinet as representing the nation, we claim that the nearest and most authoritative representations of the people in the present circumstance are the officers of Hui Hawaii Aloha Aina, who have proved their loyalty to your person and their discretion and trustworthiness. Moreover, your majesty should remember that the entering by you in your official capacity into any secret agreement with Minister Willis would be a violation of all constitutional principles and would not be binding on your restored cabinet, nor on any other that might follow who has executive power would be responsible to the people for agreements and their fearful consequences taken without their previous consent. Number 2, in the matter of the Constitution, apart from the desires and expectations of the Hawaiian people for a new instrument canceling the injustices of the last one, which has virtually been abrogated by the rebels themselves, your majesty should consider the consequences to yourself and to your people resulting from the restoration of the old Constitution. You must admit that though the odious and unjust property qualifications which have disenfranchised your native subjects in their own country and given virtual control of the elections to the moneyed classes, those mortal enemies of your majesty and of your people, the old Constitution would again give it back to those same enemies, the legislative power of the land, which they soon would control again through their former tactics. Number 3, the question of amnesty is equally dangerous and gets more so when combined with the constitutional one. Since this would confirm to all the present rebels and enemies of our autonomy all their civil rights of electing and being elected and of governing, it is useless for us to state to your majesty how the bitter and unprincipled rebels would use those rights to seal your fate and that of your people. In fact, with such an amnesty, together with keeping the old Constitution, our members consider that the country would be worse off than it is now, and that their past troubles would be sure to repeat themselves in a very short while. By your majesty conceding these 2 points, if the rumor be correct, you are therefore virtually surrendering yourself and your people to the enemy. And this is sufficient to justify our alarm and the misbodings of our association. But these sentiments of ours are further increased if we give credence to the rumor that these untimely and ruinous concessions, on which the Hui Aloha Aina have not been consulted, have been counseled to your majesty by certain unrepresentative advisors, whom your majesty well knows are disliked, mistrusted, and feared for very good reasons by all your loyal subjects. Those advisors have done nothing for your majesty in the past crisis but cheap talk, while your majesty's strength lies in the fight made for you by the Hui Aloha Aina. If your majesty is willing to run personally the dangers we allude to, it is a duty we owe to ourselves and to our families to protest and ask that at least you may not jeopardize the nation's interest and future and nullify the efforts we have made to save our country from the pirates who have seized it. The undersigned hope that your majesty will excuse this plain talk, but as they claim to have proven that none are more loyal and faithful subjects than them, they respectfully think that they are entitled to the favor of expressing before your majesty the opinions of their followers, and to a right also of being awarded some proofs of confidence and trust. Moreover, in view of the responsibilities that weigh on their shoulders through the confidence of the members of the Hui, they wish to place themselves on record as having dutifully sounded the alarm, so that they may not be blamed if the members get discouraged and apathetic when they hear that their hopes and expectations of a good, stable, and just native government are frustrated. Of your majesty, the most humble and obedient subjects, Honolulu, this 12th day of December, 1893, Joseph Nawahi. Whew. So, talk about throwing things into a mix. I had always said, oh my God, it almost happened. It was almost restoration. But here is the people. Here is the largest representative group of Kanaka Oiwi in the nation saying, don't give them amnesty. Don't go back to the bayonet constitution. Knowing that that would maybe mean there's no agreement with the United States, right? That, and to ask that of the Mo'i, who has, they don't know this yet, but who has just made that deal, had to take an incredible courage of Joseph Nawahi and these other men. That's who he was. He loved his nation. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. We know restoration didn't happen. They go to the provisional government and they say, okay, you're getting amnesty, step down. There's 2 factions of that provisional government or republic that are going on. There's the Thurston faction and the Dole faction. Dole, as a constitutional lawyer, was more level-headed and said, okay, I guess we lost. Thurston says, no, I think they're bluffing. I don't think they're going to send US troops and fire on us and kill us white men to restore that brown queen. And so he calls the bluff and says, no, we're not stepping down. And he's right, because they are bluffing. The Minister Willis has not been given the power to use force to reinstate the Queen. And so there's a stalemate, and it moves forward into 1894, 95, and so forth. So 1895 comes, Huiloha Aina has waited long enough, and they're going to do a military attempt to take back the government. The spies that are put out by the Republic inform the Republic, Dole guys, that Joseph Nawahi, Bipikane, William Punoho White, and others are leading the fight with Wilcox, and that they plan to do it sometime in January. And so as a preemptive effort, forces are sent out to Joseph Nawahi's home. His Honolulu home, where he lived with Aima, was right behind the present-day Kaumakapili Church. There was a home that was owned by Princess Ruth Kealikolani that was there. Lili'u also owned a home back just behind it. And that went to Bernice Pawahi, which went to the trust, which leased it out to Nawahi. So in 93, 94, 95, 96, Nawahi is leasing that house. It's under the street now because of development, but it's that alleyway right behind Kaumakapili Church. Nawahi owned that home, or leased that home from the Bishop Museum Trust. On December 9th of that year, you see here, a search warrant is served on that home. Mrs. Nawahi answers the door. There's police there. One of the policemen has sworn an affidavit, completely lied, full of lies, that says Nawahi has guns and weapons in the house and is full of treasonous intent. They search the entire home. They don't find guns and weapons, but they arrest Nawahi anyway. And they bring Nawahi and two others, Crick and I think it's Bush, to prison in December of 1895. I'm sorry, 1894. 1895, a month and a half later, is when the revolt breaks out. But again, spies have thwarted the organization of it. But Nawahi is not part of that 95 push. So his case is heard in March of 95, and he's released because he was not guilty. He was in prison at the time. Nonetheless, he's contracted tuberculosis while he's in prison, and he'll die about a year and a half later. That's his arrest warrant there. When he dies in 1896, the kingdom's greatest patriot has passed away. The fight against the Republic is ongoing. The gentleman who presides over his funeral, the funeral begins at his home there in Kapalama, over by Kaumakapili Church. Reverend Enoch Samaya Timoteo is the reverend who presides over the funeral. Side note, he's a gentleman that myself and a couple of other folks are working on to honor. He's buried in the Royal Cemetery in Lahaina at Waiola Church. We're doing a fundraiser and project in April to restore his grave and have an education day on him, Reverend Enoch Samaya Timoteo. So keep an eye out if you want to be part of that. We're bringing the family back as much as we can also. But he was a royalist pastor who served the kingdom well. He was, when the Queen was released from prison, the first place she went was to Reverend Timoteo's home with his wife and stayed there for 2 weeks. In the funeral procession, Timoteo says this: "We look upon this coffin and the earthly body of the man that the people look to as the ship's mast, the supporting pillar, the advisor, and the only leader to unite the minds of the people everywhere." Yeah, no one ever didn't make that claim that Nawahi united the people, that everyone listened to him, that he had the people's interest at heart, not his own. He served his nation. These are pictures from the funeral. So the funeral left his home in Kapalama, marched down to the wharf, Honolulu Wharf. They loaded his body onto the Kina'u, the ship, the Kina'u. They brought it first to Lahaina. Mrs. Nawahi, in a lowered skiff, brought his body ashore at Malu'ulolele, where the Huiloha Aina o Malu'ulolele, led by William White and his wife and others, and Makikaos and the Cockets and so forth, rode out to meet Mrs. Nawahi and pay their respects to the body. Then he was loaded back on the Kina'u and brought to Hilo. These are photographs of when the body arrived in Hilo. They had a boat procession, decking ferns and so forth. You see those there. My cohort, Darcy, told me where this place is, so you can talk to her about it. She spotted it. This is some of the other photographs of them bringing the body of Joseph Nawahi ashore in Hilo. What's one more? This is actually in Oahu, Honolulu Harbor, when they're leaving to go to Hilo. This is a photograph that I can't guarantee 100% is his funeral, but I believe it is. It's just marked funerals. September 1896, which he was the only major funeral of that time. I believe this was his funeral, coming down from his home to the harbor. You see the band there, policemen and so forth. This is also leaving Honolulu Harbor with the body of Joseph Nawahi. And this is arriving in Hilo once again. This is where he's buried today. So, you know, I'm going to get back to how we opened. He pohaku haole ko Enelani. Enelani had Gladstone, right? There are 130, I think, I looked it up on the internet about a year ago, 130, 140 different statues of Gladstone, the great leader of England in the 19th century, around England. Germany has Bismarck, one of the major statues of Otto von Bismarck there in Germany. Russia has Alexander, Tsar Alexander. This is one of the statues of the hundreds that are of him around Russia. This one is St. Petersburg. Italy has Garibaldi. This is Garibaldi's statue in Rome. Spain has Columbus. This is one of the dominant statues in Spain for Columbus. America has Washington. We have the Washington Monument. Yet there's no Nawahi statue. One of the greatest patriot who was called an equal of all of these great nations leaders doesn't have a statue. But what we do have is this. I'm going to play this for you really quickly. If you've seen it before, Kalamai, but this is the fact that, I'm going to share it again. Where'd it go? Here it is, okay. I'm going to bring it back up here. For some reason it cut out. Okay. Give me 1 second, I'll bring it up here. Okay, so on February 8th, 2019, Eva Elementary School held their 75th annual Abraham Lincoln Day. The entire school is dressed up in Abraham Lincoln t-shirts that the DOE pays for. They make lei and they honor this incredible statue of Abraham Lincoln there in Eva. I want you to show you a little video from that, so we can start to understand the depth of this problem. Okay, it's coming up now. I'm going to share. Boom. Okay, share that one right there. Okay, see if you know who the special guest is of the day.
Ron, it's the wrong screen.
What?
It's the wrong screen. It's still your PowerPoint.
Okay, hold on. Start again. Yeah, let me know if it's.
Morning and aloha, everyone.
How's that?
Oh,
Like
hi.
Good morning and aloha, everyone. It's great to be here for the 75th annual Lincoln Day program. Governor Ige's father and my father went to Eva Elementary School, and I attended Eva Elementary School. There's so many memories, so many things that we've learned that we carry through our lives, and it all started here for me at Eva Elementary School. Make you happy and great lay of love I give to you. Reads 5 and 6. To think of me when you are blue.
Okay, today we celebrate the 75th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln. We unveiled the statue in 1944 with student performances, which we carry on today. Some of the traditions we have are the reciting of the Gettysburg Address, the Royal Hawaiian Band, and a lot of student performance and speeches. Recently, we added the Lincoln Day Essay Contest, and that winning essay was read today. It's always a special day when we have Lincoln Day, whether it's the 75th annual or.
Kalamai. I can't listen anymore. Okay, so I'm going to bring you back up one more time, Kalamai. So, how many Eva 3rd, 4th, 5th graders can cite Nawahi, the greatest patriot of the Hawaiian nation? Yet they're being told to memorize Abraham Lincoln. Regardless of your politics, that's asinine. It's so absurd. So again, motivation. Yeah, I want us all to think about claiming space. I want us all to think about taking Nawahi cards to your daughter or son's classroom and asking the teacher if they want to work it into the curriculum somehow. I want to talk about putting a photograph in your home so that at least when your kids come home from school, they can see who the greatest Hawaiian patriot was, and so forth. The depth of the problem is astounding. So I'm going to finish up here with that. Oop. Is that it? Let's see. Oh, that is it. Okay, so yes, so what his contemporaries referred to, what I've come to understand as a historian, the incredible man he was. He wasn't alone. There were thousands of Po'eloha Aina across the nation. He's an example for us of making those hard decisions that show your loyalty to your lahui. And so I hope we all remember that on this day of his birth and the rest of the year, to do these projects in our own homes, in our own libraries, in our own schools that claim space, that are active, that get something done instead of just being frustrated by it. Okay, I thank you all for being here tonight. I've got plenty of time to stick around and answer questions. I'd love to answer questions if I can. So I'll be here. I don't know if I think Emily's going to take over and kind of help us out with that. But I do appreciate all of you for taking time tonight to hear this mo'olelo along.
Mahalo, Ron. Hey, Ron, could you put your PowerPoints back to the pictures of Nawahi's I guess his procession after in Wahala?
Aye.
Mahalo.
Aye.
So the only question that came through the chat was about whether or not there are descendants of his, and then I would say we can just open, like whoever has a question can unmute themselves. Oh, and we do have another question in the chat.
I'm not a genealogist. I'm not a biographer of Nawahi either. I do know that the Meyer family come from Nawahi, Mehalani and Maile and the Myers. And there were others, and there were lots of others, but I'm not sure who they are.
And so the other question in the chat box was, why, in your opinion, has Nawahi been neglected from the history books?
It's not just Nawahi. It's the answer for every Hawaiian. You know, I don't get emotional, but it's very simple and straightforward. Dr. Trask used to say all the time, it's a process they've mastered over thousands of years of colonization. In 1900, a small group of white men had to convince the United, you know, we like to make the United States the awful, evil government. Parts of them did do those types of things, but there were also folks who were anti-imperialist. There were also folks, I wrote an article about college debates in the United States. Every debate that happened at the major universities in America said no to annexation. The problem is the small group of haole men in Hawaii have to convince a nation that is supposedly of the people, by the people, and for the people, that 3,000 white folks should rule a country of 150,000 brown folks. It's anti-democratic. It's completely absurd. So how do they do it? The only option they have is to erase all the accomplishments of Kanaka Oiwi leadership, obliterate it. And they start in 1895 with getting rid of the language. Moving to English only in schools is the way you start. so that by 3 or 4 generations later, even if they wanted to, the new generation cannot know these acts that were happening because of Nawahi and so forth. And you start to rewrite history, and you flood the landscape. You flood the landscape with lies. And that's what they did. If you walk into the library today, 100 history books on Hawaii. Still to this day, 95 of them are written by from English language sources only. It's still a problem. There are folks, beloved folks, Noe Silva, Noe Arista, and others, many others, myself and others, writing as fast as we can material about Hawaii from Hawaiian point of view, from Hawaiian voices. But we're still working uphill, and it's still we still touch the tip of the iceberg. It was a process that was done to steal a nation and to cover up, so that Hawaiians in the 1940s and 50s would not be proud of who they are. And it worked. But it's changing, and it's changing, and it can change if we do those things that I meant, and things that you think of. Claim space, refuse to let that continue. Okay.
Ron, I have a question, Ron.
Sure.
Wasn't in 1872 General Schofield came to the kingdom as a spy, and then he went back to Congress and saying that that the Hawaiian Islands was ripe to be plucked?
It was actually you're right, but it was actually the 50s, the 1850s. So as early as the 1850s, they sent Schofield out on a mission to scope out. They were looking for a naval port in the Pacific. And so Schofield came out, and he went back to the United States and said, Honolulu is the deepest water port in the Pacific and easily defended by a couple of batteries. And so at that point, folks in the United States, military folks in the United States, start getting excited. It won't be until the 1880s when Alfred Mahan in the 90s later writes about America really dominating the Pacific, when they really start to actually physically take the Pacific. But yeah, as early as the 1850s, there were folks in the United States eyeing Pearl Harbor. You know, there's when that proposed, I only mentioned it briefly, but when that was proposed, so it was proposed under Lunalilo. So under William Charles Lunalilo in 1873, this idea of, you know, the American Civil War had ended sugar production, basically ended it in the United States, the southern part of the United States. So sugar prices skyrocketed. So that pushed the growth of sugar down here because demand was still incredible, but there was no supply. So because of the American Civil War, sugar growers here are making a fortune. After the Civil War, beet growers in the South and other sugar beet growers in the South come back and start to produce, and they're like, wait a minute, like you got to protect our native sugar. So they put a tariff on the Hawaiian sugar. That's what those guys try to get rid of with the Treaty of Reciprocity. The biggest pusher of that, I don't want to say pusher like a drug, but the biggest, so when Hawaiians hear this might happen, they protest. They go to Kamakapili Church, has 400 people. Navahi's at one of those meetings. All these meetings happen and they say, no, we do not give up our territory. And they want to know what the official policy of the government is, because the government hasn't really said. And so finally he's forced to. William Charles Lunalilo's Minister of Foreign Affairs comes out and says, yes, it is the policy of our government to seek a treaty of restoration, and we're thinking about giving away Pearl Harbor. He says, no, we're not using it anyway. And you know who his Minister of Foreign Affairs was? Charles Reed Bishop. Bishop stands to make, Bishop stands to make a fortune off of railroads and other things connecting those different ports. So Charles Reed Bishop, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, comes forward in 1873 and says, yes, our policy is one to seeking reciprocity and giving away Pearl Harbor. Now, Hawaiians don't let that happen until 1887 when the Bayonet happens.
I see your hand raised. I'm going to ask you to unmute. I don't know if that's Nani on the line there.
Hi, omakayo ke aloha no.
Hi.
Mahalo e kumuran, aloha kako. My question is, as far as the education system now, so we know that America took over the education system, and that whole denationalization, right? That cultural genocide that has happened and continues to happen. At
Right.
what level currently? What level of the DOE or the government can there be a change now that the truth is available, right? And I mean, do they know the truth themselves and just decided not to do anything about it?
Right.
I mean, why is this still going on? Why is this the President McKinley statue still up there?
Right. Great questions. I'm going to give you my mana'o. This isn't as a historian, right? This isn't the truth. This is how I feel about it. I think, well, first of all, oni pa'ako i'i'o. Yeah, the truth is steadfast. If I didn't believe that we're making a difference and we're going to make a difference, and every day we make a bigger difference, if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be doing what I do 100 hours a week, right? You cannot stop the truth. And it's due to those kupuna of the 1960s and 70s and so forth who started demanding. They had no idea, you know? Those folks from Portet Kaho'olawe Johanna and so forth, that I don't want to say they had no idea, but they didn't know all of these things that we know now, but they knew something was wrong. They knew the truth was being hidden from them, and they demanded to know the truth. That started to open up the alleyways. That started to reconnect the chains, right? The lay between now and back in those days. And we started to hear those voices. And I believe wholeheartedly, I'm not Christian, but I am very spiritual, and I believe wholeheartedly that every time you go in the archives, voices come about because they want to. They reach out, right? And they make those connections, and they become books, and they become presentations, and they become so forth because they say it's time to be heard. So I believe we have that working for us. Now, institutionally, I have very big problems with the DOE. There's some wonderful people who work in the DOE, some incredible folks who work in OHE, Office of Hawaiian Education, but that institution is just a monster. And I work as a content expert for the DOE, and I can tell you, every 8 years we get together and talk for a weekend and nothing changes. They'll change a couple of sentences in a paragraph, or they'll change a title or something like that. That's my mana'o. Immersion schools, charter schools are doing a tremendous thing. They're overworked, but the DOE in particular, which you're talking about 500,000 students, it needs to be blown up. I don't mean literally. But you know what? It's not a reason to. There are ways each and every one of you can make a difference. Decide, you know, like the projects that I do on the side. My first thing was I decided the most effective way in my mana'o is not going through. It's not getting a $50,000 grant from OHA. It's not getting a $100,000 grant from the Hawaiian Council of Humanities. I'm glad people do that. For me, it's raising money and having a fundraiser and going to Kumu and saying, what do you need? If you make something good and you make something well-researched and you make something relatable, the Kumu will find a way to use it in their classrooms. And so you ask your Kumu, your kids' Kumu, what do you need? And then you talk to somebody who can help you, myself or somebody else, or and you start asking questions, and you go find photographs, and you do stuff like that. You donate, you know, that image I showed at the beginning, it costs 25 cents to get that digital image. So you get that image and you blow it up into a 20 by 20 inch pitch thing, and you put a frame around it, and you donate it to your local public library. And they put Nawahi's picture up in the library. You know, and they can't stop that, you know, and so if we make effort, if we do this in my mana'o as a grassroots thing and just start putting the narrative up there. I'll tell you one story that got me really inspired. About 8 years ago, I gave a talk on the Queen's birthday in Hilo, and I'm walking down the street, and those electric boxes, those big green electric boxes on the corners, stuff like that, somebody had spray painted a stencil of kalakaua, of white kalakaua on there, kind of like a street art. And I don't recommend people graffiti, but I'm just saying, I was walking down the street minding my own business, and all of a sudden I'm confronted with kalakaua. That's claiming space, right? So there's millions of ways. I'm hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful. It's just a matter of us just doing it. So Kalamai for the long answer.
Hey, Ron, can you show your screen of a nice picture of Joseph of Nawahi, please?
Sure. So this is the big image. Hold on. I'm gonna open this up.
Ron, the people want to know, have you thought of running for office?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's the thing is like, I don't work well in institutions, you know, I'm glad people do that, but that's not me. So here's, okay, let me share the screen. Now check out this, share screen. Where's another? Okay, now check this out when I close in. Well, see, this is due to my screen too. This is only 600 DPI, but look
Thank
at
you,
his,
brother.
you know what got me is just look at his hands. That's not a drawing, a painting. That's an image of Joseph Nawahi's hands.
One I see your hand raised.
He's a real man.
Eyo. Mahalo Nunui, Yaoko, Mahalo Kumuran. I had a quick question. I think so today some of our ohana went up to the Aina Walu Okon EV in Hilo, and Makaiva folks took some pictures with the keiki. But it was the first time that I had realized that he passed in San Francisco. So I always knowing about how he was, our people loved him so much, responded as if he was an Alii. The streets were full. But do you know anything more about his passing in San Francisco?
There's a good account of it in the biography. But he went to, he had tuberculosis. He caught tuberculosis in Oahu prison, and he was getting sicker and sicker, and he wouldn't stop working, and he just worked himself to death. And they finally, his ohana finally made him. The doctor said, in those days, I don't know really the science behind it, but in those days, it was often recommended to go to California for better air to get healthy. That's what they told Kalakaua to do also. But they felt like the sea air or something like that. I'm not sure, but that was the last hope, was that he would go to California and recover. And he gives a beautiful, beautiful speech when he passes. There's a couple of accounts of his last words, but one of them is he just apologizes to his wife for being so far away from the kingdom and from the land he loved when he passes.
Mahalo nui.
Darcy? Kumu Darcy? Is she gone? Can you explain where that place is?
Oh, so the procession.
I'll bring it back up, yeah.
Yeah. So that is where the boats are by Suisan. It's just at the mouth of Wailoa River. Yeah. So that's Hilo Bay, and the boats are coming right into the mouth of Wailoa River. So in this picture, Suisan would be on the right-hand side.
There's a question of, so if the biography is no longer in print, is there another place to read it?
Yes. Oh, I was gonna say, I was getting worried about giving it away because I don't know if I'm legally supposed to or whatever, because I have, so a translation was done for the Hawaiian Historical Society by Dr. Puakia Nogemeyer, and I've got a copy of that. But I just remembered, it is, I'm almost positive, the Hawaiian and the English are both available on Ulukau, I believe. I can check while we're talking, but I think Ulukau has both versions. It's a beautiful, beautiful biography. Yapuke. Yeah, now that I'm getting to the page, I'm almost positive. Come on. I'll look, but any more questions? Comments?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. There's,
sure.
I don't know if you can see the chat box, Ron, but people are expressing their appreciation and gratitude to you.
Here, I'm going to put a link to it here. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat for the actual biography online. Okay, so this is Makololo Hawaii, and it's online. It's for free. I don't believe the English is. Even though this is being recorded, if you send me an email, I'll send you the English one. I might get in trouble from the Hawaiian Historical Society, but oh well. Okay, chat. So there's the link to the Hawaiian version. It's for free. Yeah, and thank you guys for all coming tonight, man. That's what wins. That's what makes a difference. We all go home and tell somebody something else about him. And tomorrow we talk about it, not just on his birthday. Incredible man.
Also, reminder, if you haven't already, I tried to make sure that I responded to everyone who sent their email address, but send me a direct message with your email address if you are not already on the Hui Aloha Aina email list. I will send you a link to the download replay of this talk.
Thanks, Ems.
Yeah, thank you, Em, for putting this together. Where do we get the picture from again? Oh, so you email. Please don't everybody do it tonight. I'll get in big trouble tomorrow. But so space it out. But email Hawaii at archives.gov, right? Wait, archives at hawaii.gov. Archives@hawaii.gov, and say you'd like a digital copy of the glass plate negative 12,236 of Joseph Nawahi. Now they might call, at first, until they confirm it's already been scanned, they'll say okay, and they'll tell you it might be $30 or $40 and so forth. But once they confirm that it already has been scanned, it'll cost you 25 cents. There's a one of Mrs. Nawahi in there too. Here, I'll bring up the one of Mrs. Nawahi if we've got time. I like it actually even better. This is Nawahi. Where is he?
So if there's no further questions or comments, I mean, feel free to unmute if you want to express your gratitude verbally. But I'll stay on for a few more minutes more for anybody who needs to direct message info for after we close. But I believe, Ron, is there anything else you want to share before we end the recording?
No, just thank you so much. It doesn't matter if I have these things if nobody shows. So we only keep this mo'olelo going. We only keep this. We only make a difference. We only claim space if you guys do that. So I appreciate you guys spending your time with us tonight. Really do.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll stick around for a while longer.
Ron, I have a question. If you go to the archives and want to see this type of information, do you have to make an appointment to visit?
Well, first of all, what do you mean by this type of information?
Like if we wanted to see,
like particular documents that relate to
yes.
documents? Okay, so in general, no. So a couple of things. There are finding aids online that you can look at and kind of narrow down, so you don't, instead of spending 4 hours there, you can only take you 20 minutes. So there's finding aids that you can narrow down what you're looking for. But the vast majority of material we have, you don't need an appointment. You just come in, talk to the archivist on desk, and they'll help you find it. Things that are extremely fragile or are extremely old or so forth and need to be preserved, you have to make an appointment because the archivist will actually, with gloves and so forth and a spatula, turn the pages for you and so forth and take care of the document while you look at it. But you have access to anything we have in our collection.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I didn't eat breakfast or dinner, lunch or dinner.